Good morning, everybody. I would like to thank you for coming to the St. Louis Makes Acropolis Technology Group uh, webinar. Today's webinar is going to be on cybersecurity for manufacturing. I want to remind everybody, St. Louis Makes is a not-for-profit organization, and unfortunately, Mark had technical difficulties this morning, and he's going to be unable to join to make the opening announcements. So I'm going to make those for him. He probably should have called me and I could have got him taken care of so he could be on, but he didn't do that. Again, St. Louis Makes is a not-for-profit organization. We're here to really facilitate the manufacturing companies in St. Louis and facilitate growth, great idea sharing, and prosperity. So with that, I would like to go ahead and get started with the presentation. So let me share my screen. Okay. All right. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to do the introduction. We're going to talk about current trends in manufacturing. We're going to look at a case study, risk mitigation and best practices, and then at the end, we're going to have question and answers. Okay, so a little bit about myself. My name is Brad Butler. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Acropolis Technology Group. We started the company back in 1996. We're a managed service provider here in St. Louis, and what a managed service provider is we built the equivalent of a Fortune 500 company's IT department, and we carve it up and sell it to small and medium-sized businesses. And then we also have a project side that helps larger manufacturers or larger companies supplement what their current IT staff is lacking. So we're able to help with VMware, Microsoft, Cisco, are kind of our big three. We're an employee-owned company, so that means that every employee of Acropolis is part owner of the company. So that really drives everyone to pull in the same direction and deliver great customer service. And lastly, we are an SSAE 16 certified company, which means we have a SOC 2 Type 2 audit yearly to verify that our controls are all in place so we meet that standard of controls. So I want to talk about what's going on with cyber incidents. I'm going to go back to 2017. And if we look at the cyber incidents that have taken place in 2017, we notice that manufacturing is only 3.8% of the cyber events in 2017. So it's a really low margin. The bad guys out there basically neglected the manufacturing sector. You know, they're really focused on healthcare, professional services, but times have changed. The bad guys, the bad actors have discovered that manufacturing has really ignored cybersecurity for a long time, and they've started targeting manufacturers. As you can see here in 2020, manufacturing is number 2 on the list at 13.1% behind professional services. So the bad guys are really starting to focus on manufacturers, and they've been doing that over the last 3 years, as you can see from this graph. So it's time that manufacturers start to understand the risks and their obligation to take cybersecurity seriously and protect their businesses. Out of all the incidences that take place now, they're broken up into these major categories. We have social, which is social engineering. We have malware. Those are the big two. And my presentation today is really going to talk about combating those 2 types of events. Things where an employee makes an error and accidentally shares information, or the bad guy's actually hacking in, is really going by the wayside. That's only 10% of the incidents. So I'm going to ignore those 2. I'm really going to talk about social and malware. And many people think social. Why social? You know, why are the bad guys going to the social side of things to, create these attacks and attack the manufacturers through those means versus the malware or the flat out hacking. And the truth is that social is the easiest. The anatomy of a social engineering attack is first they have to gain your trust. And how do they gain your trust? They do this by sending out emails that look like they're from known entities. Maybe your company's on Office 365. So they're going to create an email that mimics something from Microsoft or, Google, or, I've seen them come from Sprint, from Verizon. These brands and companies that you recognize and you work with daily, they're going to mimic something from them to get you to enter in your information, so that once you enter it in, then they can get into your system. And once they get in, they sit and they monitor and they look for opportunities. Once they're in, they don't launch off the attack immediately. Industry statistics say that most of these cyber breaches last for 3 to 6 months before the attacker ever does anything, which is mind-boggling, thinking that there could be a bad actor in your system right now, not doing anything, just sitting there waiting, looking for the opportunity to strike, to gather data, to exfil data, to send data out that they're collecting. And they'll do that and it will go unnoticed for a long time, mainly because companies have no way to notice when this type of activity takes place. And once they find that opportunity, that's when they execute. And how do they execute it? Now that they're in your system, they use that trust again, because they can mimic anyone in the system, whether it's your president or CEO or somebody from accounts payable or HR. They'll do that, and then they will send an email that usually talks about risk or fear, and it normally has some urgency tied to it, like the email from the president to the controller saying, hey, I need you to wire funds to XYZ supplier ASAP, or else they're going to cut us off. So that's kind of the anatomy of those attacks. So what I want to do is I'm going to talk about a case study. This is a recent event that we have been a part of that happened in the last 6 months with a Fortune 500 company manufacturer and an engineering firm that was doing work for that Fortune 500 company. In the case study, it facilitates what the big risks are and how these bad actors are perpetrating these attacks. They're wanting to redirect funds. They attack your accounts receivable, and they do that by intercepting that or interception of an accounts receivables transaction, or they supply false invoices. And then lastly, ransomware, which this case study is going to talk about redirection of funds and accounts receivable interception. So how this attack unfolded. From our client standpoint, our client was the engineering company. The bad actor got into the manufacturing company's email, and they found out who the accounts receivable person was through LinkedIn. And they were able to infiltrate that person's account, and they sat there and they waited for a transaction sizable enough for them to be interested in. And this transaction was over $100,000. So they monitor this and they see this transaction take place. And what they do is they created a domain name that was one letter off from the engineering firm. It's very easy when you look at an email address to mistake an I for an L. So that's what they did, is they created a domain name that was the engineering firm's domain name with an I, or with an L replaced for an I. So the manufacturing company didn't notice a difference in the email chain. So they intercepted the email chain, and they started off with these emails. The top email looks very similar to the bottom email. The same wording, it was the same people carbon copied on the email, asking for payment. So the bottom email is the one from the bad actors that say, hey, we got a directive from our controller, we've done everything down into a single invoice, we voided all your other invoices, if you could please pay this via our SunTrust wire. So they sent that to the accounts receivable people or accounts payable people at the Fortune 500 company. At that point, their internal controls kicked in. They said, hey, wait a second. We've never wired money to this company before or to this bank for you. So you need to fill out this new form. They forwarded the form to the bad actors. The bad actors printed it off, filled it out, scanned it, sent it back to them just like anybody at the engineering firm would have done. And at that point, the Fortune 500 company said, okay, great, we got your new wire information. We're going to wire you the funds. So they ended up wiring $100,000 to the SunTrust account. And then a week later, our client, an engineering firm, sent them an email saying, hey, we haven't received your payment yet. Where's it at? And this manufacturer came back and obviously said, hey, we paid you, last week. And the engineering firm's like, no, you didn't. And then that's when they called us and we got involved because they wanted us to verify that their system had not been compromised. So we go in and we start doing the forensics and we start working with the Fortune 500 company's IT department. Sure enough, it was on the Fortune 500 company's side where the breach had taken place, but they did a superb job of mimicking our client and extracting those funds from the manufacturer. Now, unfortunately, the manufacturer was out the funds and they still owed the money to our client, the engineering firm. So they got, they got hit for a lot. And it was a pretty ingenious way that they pulled it off. After doing all the forensics and figuring out what happened, the bad actors were in this system for over 3 months before they realized that they could do this. So that's pretty scary. Now, what could the manufacturer have done to avoid this? Well, one thing they could have done is they could have implemented the NIST cybersecurity framework. What this framework is this is put together by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They built this framework back in 2017, realizing that manufacturing companies were starting to be targeted more and more by bad actors. So I'm going to pull this document up from their website. And today, this is a 57-page document, and I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. So you can come down, you can see as I scroll down through here, it's a lot of data. But here are all the different controls and things that this framework refers to, which is a little bit of a daunting task for smaller organizations to undergo. But as we scroll down, we come down to the controls and things like that it lays out. And it lays it out for manufacturing, defined by the type of manufacturing company you are, whether you're low risk, moderate risk, or high risk for the types of things you manufacture. It's a very interesting article, and it does walk you through how to determine this and build this for your organization. But like I said, today I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. The link is going to be in the slide deck that we'll share with everyone later. So let me jump back to the PowerPoint. So the first step is to identify. You have to know what your risks are before you can do anything to protect them. And the identify function, this is not an IT only function. You cannot delegate this to your director of IT or your internal tech staff. This is a function that is organizational wide. This includes your management team, all your key stakeholders. And when you go through the identify process, you need to look at your key systems and figure out which ones are the most prone to attack and which ones you can live without, because not all IT functions or business functions are created equally. So the first thing you have to do is in that identify process is get everybody in a room, sit down, rank your business processes, map those business processes to IT functions and IT assets to figure out what needs to be protected and what doesn't. Now, the next one is protect. And this is where most IT organizations or most internal IT people at manufacturing companies, this is where they do a pretty good job. That's why you see the hacking is only 10%. And with the protect, you employ what they call a defense in-depth strategy. So IT security is not just one product. It is multiple products layered on top of each other that create a defense that protects you from the bad guys. It starts out with things like your firewall, and then it goes to things like your spam filter and your desktop antivirus. And lastly, it comes down to your policy management. And this is one thing that I'm going to talk more and more about, because as the hackers move to social engineering and attacking the humans that sit at the keyboard, this is probably the most important thing that a manufacturer can do now to protect themselves from cyber threats. And with those human factors, the keys that you really need to come up with is you have to have a well-crafted and well-documented policy and procedure and controls. That's the baseline that really can protect your organization. Without those, you really don't have anything to build upon. Along with that, we recommend using two-factor authentication. The days are past of, username and a long cryptic password that nobody remembers, or they write down on their notebook, by their desk, or they reuse everywhere because they're like, ooh, I got a good password. It's long, it's complex, and I can remember it. So I'm going to use it to log into my work computer, and I'm going to use it on social media, and I'm going to use it on target.com because I can remember it. It's good. So we recommend going to two-factor authentication because that takes what your username and password, plus something that you have on your person, whether it be a text message to a cell phone or random code that's generated on an app on your iPhone or your Google phone. We really recommend that. That is the best way to secure your environment. Next, with those policies and procedures, you have to train your employees, because without training, they're not going to know any better. And I recommend training your employees at least once every 3 months, having some sort of security awareness training, or you can actually hire a company that will do ongoing security awareness training based on your users' actions. So they may send out a well-crafted phishing campaign and blanket an entire organization with that phishing campaign. And then the people that click on the links are the ones that end up getting trained. It'll say, this was a bad email. You should have looked at these things here and realized it was a phishing attack. And it will make them watch a 3-minute video that explains, how to avoid those types of things, what to look for, and then it will retest them a week later or 2 weeks later or a month later. And as owners and CEOs and C-level executives, you would end up getting a report that says, XYZ in your quality control department, failed this test twice or 3 times. You really need to go back and train them again. And that is a great way to help safeguard your organization and perpetuate that ongoing training. Next, to avoid the attack like what I spoke about in the case study, you really need to maintain a secure vendor list. And that vendor list should have all the controls in it that specify, where they normally wire their money to or from. And if there's any changes made to that list or any changes made outside of that list, it requires a voice verification from a party on the other end, not just simply sending an email, hey, I need you to fill out this form. You really need to have those controls in place that you voice verify and who you're talking to, then you can perpetuate those changes or make the changes to the vendor list. And lastly, you need to understand your social media footprint. This is one that is, it's counterintuitive and the marketing people don't like it, but it's really what the bad actors do. All of our companies are on LinkedIn. And we put all of our information out there. If you go out and look at acropolistech.com, you'll see my role out there. You'll see my engineers' roles out there. But the one role you won't see is my accounts payable person or my accounts receivable person or my controller. I know there are people on this call from looking at your LinkedIn profile that you are a perfect target if somebody wanted to target and hack you. I know I could craft an email from Patrick or George and send it to Amber and get her to respond to that email because she'll trust the sender and she won't even recognize that it's not, Patrick or George, because she won't notice the, one little letter change, an O to a 0 or something like that in the domain name. And then she'll respond, and then that's when the bad actor can get in. So you really need to understand that. I recommend, taking those people with financial controls off LinkedIn, or at least remove their titles so they're just an average employee and they would not be targeted. Now, the next phase of the NIST framework is detect. This is the one thing that most companies do not do, and they do not do it well. Or if they do it, they do not do it well. And my recommendations on the detect side is to hire a managed service security provider. These guys are specialists. They know what they're doing. We are not a managed security service provider, just throwing that out there. So this isn't a commercial for Acropolis. We work with several who are very good. But these guys, these are experts in the field. They know what they're doing. They have all the investment in the tools and technology to manage and monitor this type of thing. If an organization wanted to roll this out internally, they'd be looking at having to hire a CISP, a gentleman who makes, well over $100,000, looking at probably another $100,000 in tool costs to really manage this. And then depending on the size of the organization, you may need 2 or more analysts to actually understand the data that takes place, because there's so much data that flows into this. You have all your logs that are collected from your servers and workstations, your firewalls, your switches, your IDSs. All of those logs come in, and then they have to be aggregated and correlated to see if there's an event taking place. So if an event does take place, that correlation allows the forensics team to understand what data was exfilled from your company, if any data was exfilled. And that all comes into a SIM. And then your SOC would be the people that monitor that, or that's the Security Operations Center. Again, this is a big, daunting task. The managed service security providers really have this figured out now. They have the tools, they have the manpower to monitor all this. They're starting to make the investment into AI to realize when things are taking place that may have been missed in the past, and then they can supply all the reporting and everything else with this. Out of the NIST framework, this is the one thing that, like I said, I would recommend outsourcing if you could. It's cost feasible, it makes sense, it's a good way to do it. So the next step is, after you detect an issue, now you have to respond. Now, the respond piece, this one here is daunting because there's all sorts of different types of things that take place. It could be somebody breaking in and getting into your HR system and stealing your employee information, stealing their social security numbers. That is a different response than if somebody, comes in and plants ransomware on your network. But on the response side, you need to plan out your breaches before it happens. And with that, the breach response needs to include, legal. It needs to include marketing, because you're going to have to notify your clients. You may have to notify other people in the supply chain. Depending on the type of breach, you may have to notify the state. Again, this is not an IT-only process on the respond. It really takes all the stakeholders and everyone in the company to craft this and put it together. And lastly, on the response side, this is where you can leverage your cyber security insurance or your cyber liability insurance. If you don't have it, I recommend getting it. Even though you're like, I'm a manufacturer, I don't work in IT. Why do I need cyber liability insurance? Because your cyber liability policy, this is one place that can combine all of this response planning into one spot. Depending on your writer, when you contact your cyber liability company, they'll have attorneys on staff or agreements with attorneys that can come out and help you craft your response. They'll let you know what your options are, what you may be liable for, what you may not be liable for. The cyber liability insurance, they often have relationships with remediation teams that can come in and help remediate the issue and do the forensics to figure out, what happened, why it happened, how it happened. Also, they can have that cyber liability insurance. You can have business loss insurance. So if you are down and if you are losing, hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, that insurance can help keep you whole while you work through that process. The response is a key factor that needs to be planned out, and you need to do it ahead of time. After a breach happens is the wrong time to figure out, ooh, what am I going to do now? So you need to put some time in beforehand and plan this out. And then lastly, you have recovery. The recovery, and to recover properly, it's not just about restoring your backups. Again, you have to put the thought in ahead of time. Your recovery process needs to be built around two things. One is recovery point objective. The other one is recovery time objective. Recovery point is how old can the data be when you restore it? And recovery time is how quickly or how long can you be down? As recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives converge, normally the cost of your business continuity plan escalates. As they approach zero, that means it's real time. Your business continuity plan is going to increase in cost. So you need to sit down, understand the cost of downtime for your business, and specifically individual systems, because not every system needs to have a high recovery point objective and a high recovery time objective. So you go back to identify where you identified those systems, and now you have to plan out the recovery based on the impact of those systems on the business. Whether this is a remote data center where data is lagged by 15 minutes or by an hour. So if there is a ransomware attack, you can seamlessly fail over to it. Or if a more traditional business continuity plan makes sense where you can be down for a day and that's okay. So that's the recovery piece. As I've stepped through the NIST framework, I should have brought this up at the beginning. You can ask questions anytime, and then we'll go over those at the end, because now I'm going into the question and answer session. Are there any questions?
So it looks like one that came through, and then we've got a few through email. So the one that came through says, so why isn't Acropolis a managed service or a managed security provider? Will you help me find one?
Yeah, okay. So the reason that Acropolis is not a managed security provider is we manage our clients' networks. So if you think of us like a bank, for example, when you think about a bank, you don't think about security, but security is laced into everything they do. That's what Acropolis is for our clients. Security is laced into everything we do. So we like to use a third-party security provider to audit our work. So, that keeps everything at an arm's length. It lets our clients know exactly what type of job we're doing for them and how good of a job we're doing, because we get audited by that third party, if that makes sense. And we're happy to set you up with one of our referral sources for that.
Okay, our next question is, we are a small manufacturing firm, and I like the robust framework you've laid out, but what are the top 3 things we should do to protect us?
Okay, so top 3 things that I would do for a small manufacturing firm. Number 1, I would implement 2-factor authentication immediately. It's a very low cost way to do it. I would implement that. I would implement security awareness training. Again, you need to train your end users what to look for so they do not become victims of one of these social engineering attacks. And thirdly, I would develop tight process controls and procedures around our vendor list to protect ourselves from accidentally sending money to, a bad actor. Those are probably the top 3 things that I would do right now.
Next question is, we are a manufacturer with Department of Defense contracts. You mentioned using a managed service security provider. Would that help us reach CMMC level 4 compliance?
Yes, it most likely will. It depends on the managed security service provider that you work with, but the ones that we work with, they would help you reach that level of compliance.
The next one is, I understand the need for training our end users, but how should we go about developing that content?
Okay, with that content, if you're working with Acropolis, we have tools, at our disposal that can help you develop that content. We can manage those campaigns. We can do things like that. If you are not an Acropolis client, then I would go out and I would just search Google for security awareness training. There are companies out there that can handle those programs and create them, or give you the tools to create them. It'll create a little bit more management on your behalf because you have to manage that campaign, create the campaign, and monitor it. But that's what I would do. Okay,
we've got 2 more.
Okay.
You mentioned that this is a NIST framework for manufacturing. How does that mesh with NIST 800-171?
Okay, so this framework and 800-171 are they really dovetail. They're virtually one and the same. The 800-171 is a newer framework, so there are some minor modifications, but as far as the controls and the requirements, they're nearly the same.
Last question. We use Salesforce and other cloud services. Would we need to use different multi-factor authentication apps for all of them?
It really depends on what cloud services you use. But usually they'll have 1 or 2 in common that they'll both work with. One is Authy. That's a very popular one. Another one is called Duo. Duo is a great multi-factor authentication tool that you can use. That would work across all your all your cloud services. Anything else, Maria?
Nope, that's it.
All right. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today and joining. I hope you got at least a nugget or 2 out of this. And I know myself and Mark, we're always looking for case studies. So if any of you have any interesting case studies, whether they're IT security related or just IT related, we'd look forward to hearing from you so that we can maybe put those together and share them with the rest of the community. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.